even the most experienced pilots can fall prey to illusions and find themselves spatially disoriented. My name is Nathan, and I'll be discussing what illusions really are and why they so easily deceive us, as well as why they're so dangerous for us aviators. Illusions defined. The FAA has some good definitions in the PHAC and AIM, but in layman terms, illusions are anything that are deceptive in nature and can trick our bodily systems, while spatial disorientation is anything that causes us to lose track of our position and attitude in space. So, how do our bodies get fooled? Well, to understand this, we must first understand how it orientates itself and knows where it's at in relation to the space around it. And it does this via three internal systems: the vestibular, somatosensory, and visual systems. The vestibular system consists of tiny organs within our ears that detect motion, and the somatosensory system is made up of all the nerves within our skin, muscles, and joints, along with all the audio input that comes through our ears that senses the Earth's gravitational pull and uses the audio senses to understand what's going around outside of it. And the visual system consists of the eyes and the optical sensory information that gives us visual cues. And as we learned in class, makes up one of the most important sources of outside information for our bodies to orientate themselves. So ignore this picture on the right for a second. This diagram represents one of the little organs within the ear called the semicircular canals. And we've learned a lot about them, and you probably remember that they're situated on a roll, pitch, and yaw axis. And in addition to those semicircular canals, there's also another two organs called the utricle and saccule that are located right here, that are also filled with little hairs and fluid that help detect the body's motion. So vestibular and visual illusions, blue being the vestibular and red the visual. These aren't all the illusions, but they're some of the most prevalent in aviation, and I really wish we would have time to go through each and every one of them because they're fascinating, but unfortunately time doesn't permit. But today we'll talk a little bit about the leans in our case study next, and some common ones in the visual that you might have encountered already. One being narrow runway. Having a narrow runway makes it appear as if we're higher up, so we'll want to go lower on our glide slope than we should be. On the contrary, a downsloping runway, it appears we are closer because we're on the higher end of the runway, so we'll overshoot our approach as opposed to being right on. So those are just a few to keep in mind. And the tragedy of Air India Flight 855 took place on New Year's Day in 1978. And this accident was a result of disorientation and, I would argue, illusions of being the leans. And I'll explain here in a second. So this flight was destined for Dubai, but only 101 seconds after takeoff, it ended up going into the Arabian Sea right around here. And as you can see, the crew were very experienced. And what happened was when the pilot took off, he made his standard right bank turnout, but his attitude indicator stuck, and it toppled and was stuck in that right position. And when he consulted his first officer, who is no rookie himself, as you can see, he reported that his attitude indicator was also toppled. But it's believed that his was working, but his was turned in the left bank position because that was what the captain was doing to correct for that right bank that he thought he was in. And just seconds before the crash into the ocean, because the plane lost a lot of altitude in that bank, the flight engineer of 11,000 flight hours was trying to point out the third backup attitude indicator in the middle between the two pilots. And while they did what was right and tried to work with their instruments, it's clear that they were disoriented. And I believe the leans, it's one of the things that was reported to have affected the flight. And if you don't know what that is, it's when the pilot makes an abrupt correction of his banked angle. The fluid in the ear slowly returns back to its equilibrium, and therefore causes the body to feel like it's in a opposite bank. And while we should trust our instruments, and I believe if those pilots had just a little bit more time to figure out what was going on, they would have fixed their attitude and got out of that situation. But it's just proof that anyone can be deceived. They were relying on their instruments rather than their bodies, which was what they're trained to do. And this quote here, an illusion dissipated is an experience gained. Christian Beauvais was no pilot, but he was a famous author. And I think this statement rings true for us as well, that the more we know and understand illusions, the more we can combat and troubleshoot them in a time of need. And here are my sources.